I think enough people have joined that we can like get started a little bit. For those who haven't done this before, welcome. Hello. This is sort of like a new thing that we're doing at the newsletter where we're inviting amazing people like you, Caitlin, to come and just have a conversation, super informal, talk about their work, and we'll chat for a little bit. And then folks will have an opportunity to ask questions and just have a little bit of a conversation. But it's super chill, and this is a really good group of people, I have to say. Like the community here is pretty awesome, and so they always have good questions and things to say, so it's nice. But thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this in the middle of what I know is a super busy time for you.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite and love your followers. So anytime
Oh, good.
they're
I'm
great.
glad.
They're great. Give me
um yeah, for those who maybe don't know you or don't know Abortion in America, do you want to just like intro yourself and talk a little bit about how you came to work with the organization and what the organization is about and everything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey y'all, I'm Caitlin Joshua. I am a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I kind of fully came into this fight after my own lived experience 2.5 years ago. I was navigating trying to get healthcare in our system here in Louisiana. When my husband and I had found out we were expecting, we were super excited about it, but fast forward to right around 11 weeks, I didn't make it full term. I started experiencing miscarriage symptoms, pain like no other. Like I cannot describe that pain. I cannot put that pain in words. And I've had two babies at this point, and there was nothing like that pain with that miscarriage. And so I found myself trying to go to several different hospitals in the area, but everybody told me the same thing, that there wasn't anything they could do for me. And now that I'm on the other end of that, and after it took 2 months, right under 2 months for me to pass that miscarriage, I am so like I've learned so much in these last 2.5 years and met so many women with these same terrible, more harrowing stories, if you will. And it has certainly like broadened my horizons around what reproductive health care really is, what abortion care really is. And like I know I've been coined as the abortion lady in my state, and that's fine because I am so well versed on the issue now, and I consider myself an advocate. And how I came to Abortion America. So Cecile Richards looked me up like a year and a half ago or so, and reached out to me for king cake, king cake and coffee.
That's
Right
so
Mardi
cool.
Gras. Yeah, it was like literally, it just still feels like such a dream. But Cecile reached out to me last January, so in 2024, and we went to, eat king cake and that coffee that I keep talking about when I share this story. And she expressed to me that, she knew that there was such a healthcare crisis in this country, right? Around abortion care, around states not being able to, women not being access to care in their states. And so it was important for her to make sure that she's identifying folks in different parts of the country that could do this work and do it together in a way that makes sense and really makes impact. And so we, of course, at the time we had no idea it would be called Abortion in America, but the idea behind Abortion America and what it has become today, as it is now a full nonprofit project, a storytelling project, excuse me, where we basically share stories of women that have faced adversity when trying to access care in their state, denied care, particularly post Roe. Let me be clear about that. So
Yeah.
that those statistics were going to be exacerbated as a result of these egregious laws in the states that have abortion bans, and so we want to focus on those states, and that's what we've been doing. We've told stories out of Louisiana, obviously, Texas, Florida, and we'll continue that journey this year and beyond. And the scope is kind of large, and a lot of folks have asked me, like, what is the goal of Abortion America? It's
Yeah.
kind of twofold. One, we want a place and space in which these stories live well beyond the 24-hour news cycle, because we saw, even like with elections, right? Like people come and go on these issues, and where are we making sure that these stories are housed and live forever? And most importantly, help journalists like identify, vetted, well-sourced storytellers that want to share their story, that want to get the word
Yeah.
out, ultimately change hearts and minds, which is what we know we got to do to change policy, right? And to change the real impacts that people are faced every single day. And we're still hearing those same terrible stories, right, coming out of Georgia and Texas and so many places. So we know we've got a lot of work to do, but Abortion America is willing to do that. And so we are all about centering the storytellers, supporting them, whatever that looks like. We're exploring some pretty exciting ventures to come, and I'll share more on that when you have me back.
Yeah.
But certainly we are trying to do the hard work. I always say we're doing the Lord's work to make sure that we are, doing what we can to help people understand these issues and connect the dots.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So how long has the organization existed now?
So we officially launched. So I would like to say we existed like almost a year, 9 months, 10 months.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
We
been a minute.
officially launched in New Orleans in November of last year, and New York in October of
Right.
last year. So officially on paper in October, and have been
That's
kicking,
very cool.
rocking and rolling ever since. So it's been pretty amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome. How can you talk a little bit about like how you find storytellers?
Yeah.
Obviously, we're here, I think people's first experience with so many storytellers are through these like horrible news stories, right? Like something terrible happens to someone and like local media covers it or national media covers it, and that's how we get to know people. And like you said, once that story is gone, we sort of don't hear from that person again. And so I'm curious how you all go about identifying people, contacting them, like what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I know one of our co-founders, Lauren Collins Peterson. She's out of New York, and I consider Cecile's right hand woman. I think most people do. She would laugh at me because I would. She would have to say that I am probably, I'm like a storyteller guru. Like I go find them, right? Like I will like use leads or contacts that I
Yeah,
currently have to do calling and outreach to storytellers and folks that have not shared their story. They'll kind of find themselves in my DMs or my messages or my emails, or someone
yeah,
will send them my way. And so I've kind of spent, I don't know, like hundreds of or thousands of hours of this point of just talking, having one-on-one conversations and building relationships with so many women, families, birthing people in general over the course of the
yeah,
last year. That has been like my goal. And so that's one way that we find storytellers or we get in touch with them is via me. And then of
yeah,
course, I feel like Abortion America, now that we're like really getting our name out there, folks are getting more comfortable with like reaching directly out to the organization, which has been really beautiful to
right,
see. Yeah, and
right,
different folks can kind of take on different pieces of the work, but for the most part, it's a lot of via me or like email or
right.
yeah.
What are people like? What are they worried about when they? Because I imagine you probably have a lot of people who are like, okay, I want to go out, I want to talk about this, but then there's probably some folks who are feeling a little more hesitant, and like, how do you make sure they're supported, or like, how do you all think about that?
Yeah, I love that question because it's a big one, and certainly that I keep at the forefront of my mind. Like obviously,
Yeah,
you have very much trauma informed when doing this work. And even though I wear a smile on my face today, right now, like it is not all, it's not all happy go lucky, if you will. It's a lot of crying, it's a lot of tears, it's a lot of emotions. And so we have to make sure that we've got right people on our team to make sure they can handle these
yeah,
situations and these conversations with grace. And so we actually have someone identified on our team that does trauma informed therapy. I consult a lot with her before I go out and have these harder conversations with storytellers. And to
yeah,
the point you make around people being, very hesitant about sharing their story, or even a lot of times somebody might reach out and say, "I really want to share my story," and then they change their mind, right? Just because
yeah,
sharing that story over and over again is so traumatic and it brings up all the feelings. And so to that, we don't push it, right? Like we know
yeah,
that everyone will, in their right time, will certainly be more comfortable in sharing their story. I've been very transparent as a storyteller myself. Like it comes with a lot, right? Like essentially, you
yeah,
want that you know what you're signing yourself up for. And I've been very candid. I've had elected officials that don't particularly care for me or love me, right, in my state and know the type of work that I do, and have kind of put me in this box as being a troublemaker, which I consider a good thing, and I think
all
Cecilia
right,
too. But a lot of times, people, everyday folks that like don't do this work, don't want to sign up for that. But I try
right,
to like, just depending on where they are in this country and kind of what potential like political landscape and me taking my Abortion America hat off and being more, more so speaking as a storyteller, I make sure to prepare people fully for those conversations, that potential backlash, anything that, you might come up against. And something that we don't think about a lot of times is when these stories come out, typically reporters are required to ask the hospitals for their take on the story, right? That
yeah,
is another, that's a whole other level of, and I remember when the hospital spoke on my situation, like it was very difficult. It was almost like you were reliving that experience all over again,
mm,
based on the fact that they cannot, usually typically are not very poised to handle it with grace.
right,
Or it's very much like we've got to save our behinds, and a lot of times people aren't prepared for that. So I try to prepare them for that as well. And so it comes with a lot. But I always say this work is slow work. There's no
mm,
for it to be out of urgency, or that
right,
always be to put the storyteller first and make sure that their emotions, feelings, their families are paramount, right? And so we always make sure that we handle those situations as much as we can with grace.
Yeah, I like that idea of it being slow work. I think especially right now because and I fall victim to this as someone who writes a daily newsletter, right? Like you want to get the story out, like something is like feels really urgent and is really urgent and so you want to put the story out there, but it is so important that you're being transparent with people about what that entails if they're telling their story and like obviously my work is really different from what you all do, but I've had that experience so many times at the newsletter where someone wants to share a story, whether it's a patient or a provider or hospital staff, and sometimes you have to say, "I need to let you know. I think that like your job would be in danger if you did this," or "I need
Yeah.
to let you know like the consequences for this are going to be this," and it does really require that sort of thoughtfulness that I don't think not everyone thinks about that. And so I'm curious. I want to come back. You sort of blew past this like elected officials don't really love you. I know that you had a thing with the Louisiana AG, and so I want to talk about that in a minute. But
Sure.
I'm just wondering, with like journalists, right? Are you all thinking about how to work with journalists or how to like educate journalists about how to tell these stories responsibly, right? And working with storytellers in the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. That is certainly part of our work. And we are in the process of setting something up where we could basically do a little bit more hand holding, advocate alongside the storyteller when it
Yeah.
comes to them sharing their story, which I think is the most, as you put it, responsible way to do it, right? Especially if we are the ones that are facilitating the connection or setting them up with the interview.
Yeah.
Like we feel that sense of responsibility. And so that is something we talk about all the time and have worked really closely with our comms team to make sure that that is happening.
Yeah. What's like the best, like I think about this for myself, but also there's a lot of readers who are journalists or TV producers or whatever. Like, do you think are like the best practices for folks? If someone reaches out to you with a story, like, what do you think is the best next step, right? Is it bringing you all in? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've only had that scenario a handful of times so
Sure.
far. Just depending on the storyteller, they may say, "Hey, set me up. I can handle it. I'm good." And then a great deal of our storytellers have been pretty like transparent in that they do need that little extra help. And so
Right.
one, I know like the community that we had in Austin, Texas last month before last in February, part of the idea of having media in the room and having journalists get an opportunity to engage with storytellers was so that they could also hear and learn like what are the hesitations around sharing story,
Mhm.
what are the ways in which storytellers can feel supported whenever they are giving you so much of their time to interview them. A lot of journalists will literally fly into wherever that storyteller might live and like follow them, take photos, etc. And like so
Yeah.
we did talk through at the convening like what are best practices and what are the ways that sure a journalist can check a box and
Yeah.
do that with thoughtfulness as you say, but then also what are the ways the journalists can think about this again as slow work, even though of course there's a deadline to get that story out, but most importantly how are you making
Right.
sure that a storyteller is being centered in that conversation and you're centering their needs. I even had a journalist last week, which I thought was really cool. She emailed me and was like, girl, we could push the story down the line a little bit. Like we don't have a hard deadline. Let's move it because it's obvious this storyteller, has
Yeah.
specific needs and desires in which the way she wants me to tell this story, and we've got to take our time with it. And I thought that was so such a relief.
Yeah.
Like people are getting it. Like you don't need to rush the process. The
Right.
story there. No, I hate to say it, but stories will be there. It's all about thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think do people worry? I mean, I'm sure that they worry. Or I guess the better question is, how do you all think about like legal risk and safety risk, right? Because we've seen like sometimes when people tell their stories or they tell a story on behalf of a deceased loved one, like there's harassment, there's disinformation that's put out. I don't know. I guess I'm just like, what does that look like, and how can we support, right, those
Yeah.
people who are coming forward?
Yes, certainly. Oh my goodness, I think about that all day, every day.
And
Just in these states where we know, like, people will go after the patient or
yeah,
um, someone that might be adjacent to the patient that helped. And I think a lot of times when people share their story, they aren't thinking about that, like the legality of the situation and how it could
yeah,
potentially incriminate a loved one. I'll be quite candid. I've been keeping my eyes on a specific story here in Louisiana that has gotten
Mhm.
obviously attention. A mother, quote unquote, facilitated, right? Like this coercion of abortion. And as I've kind of like, dug through the depositions and read through a lot of the different pieces, I'm seeing where attorneys and attorney generals can easily manipulate and take advantage of a situation that may not have played out that way, but
Right.
able to get, able to incriminate a mother as a result, right? And we've seen that in other states as well. And so to that I say we are still learning. We have not found ourselves in a
Yeah.
situation where we have put someone in a predicament where they would potentially be incriminating someone. I think that is like we've been, super good with our fiscal sponsor and our attorneys and all these other people that are at our table, excuse me, and
Yeah.
making sure that before we set anything up, we aren't putting someone in a position where they could get themselves or others in trouble. And I think
Right.
the work at abortion in America, because it is, we pace ourselves. I will say that, like, we
Yeah.
don't ram through anything. And I think
Yeah.
that's the best way that we can continue to make sure our storytellers are in a good place. We're in a good place. Anybody involved is not potentially setting someone up for some jail time, honestly. Yeah.
I mean, what a nightmare that we even have to think about that. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
makes me nauseous.
Yeah.
I actually can we talk about the Louisiana story for
Yeah.
a minute? Because I feel like it's such a good, like, I think it's such a good example of the way that conservatives are targeting people and are thinking about narrative coercion, right? For anyone who's watching who doesn't know, there's a case in Louisiana where a mother was arrested on abortion charges for getting abortion medication for her teen daughter. And there's been an indictment made and an arrest warrant put out for Dr. Maggie Carpenter, who's a New York abortion provider. And one of the major talking points of the Louisiana AG and prosecutors is this idea of coercion. They didn't charge the mother with coercion because they didn't have evidence for that, but they know that voters don't want to see mothers arrested for getting their teen daughters abortions, and so they're using this idea of coercion and force, which is something I've written a lot about the newsletter. Like, they love that talking point, they love that message. Um, and I don't know like how to. It's so difficult to combat because they're so strategic,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, like, I'm sure they looked through those same depositions and were like, okay, we can use this, we can use that. This is going to work to our benefit, and they're really specifically like targeting the most marginalized folks that they think people will have the least amount of empathy for,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I don't know. So what I is there anything that you can tell us about that case, being
Mhm.
that you're in Louisiana, or without sharing anything?
Fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Don't get anybody in trouble. What I can share is one thing that I've been, whenever I have these conversations, I had a couple interviews about this and I've had to kind of punt the ball a little bit more than I will now because I know more and I've been
Yeah.
pretty trying to be a little bit more hands-on with this one. And I'm nervous because to your point, like coercion's not in the indictment papers, but they know they want, and when I say they, the Republicans, the Attorney General, the governor of the state of Louisiana wants to be able to
Right.
use the most recent Louisiana law that criminalizes folks for quote unquote coercion of mifepristone and misoprostol. Should it be in their possession and they not be the patient themselves, then they are, indeed committing a crime. And so I know they're using, and I think, and this is the part that frustrates me the most, like they're using a 39-year-old Black woman as their guinea pig for this, this potential indictment, and it just opens up so many doors. And I was actually speaking to my father-in-law about this not too long ago, and he's the most conservative Black man I've ever met in my life, and he literally straight up said, like, "Oh my God, they're in our households now. Like they're in our rooms. Like they're in the room with us right now." And I'm just like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we've been shouting. Like, how many people do we know have been able to make these hard decisions with their daughters, with their loved ones, with their caretakers, what have you, and consult with a provider who has a license, like totally legal to be able to do that. And now we are looking at them potentially creating other laws, other loopholes that could hell put us all in a predicament to do some jail time. And when you think about the severity of the situation, it is not just about this mother and her daughter, but
Right.
the historical history around women of color in particular not being able to get access to abortion care in the state of Louisiana and the deep South in general. Like this is this is a larger fight, and I like really just hope people are understanding that it
Yeah.
is not just about like this one-off case. They're setting us up for years of not being able
Yes.
to not be able to kind of pull back some of the lack of access that we haven't been able to receive ever in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and to that I say I've pushed back so much on the narrative around like this public opinion or public narrative that people are insinuating that like this mother is a terrible mother and she shouldn't have done these things. That's not what people are saying at all in the state of Louisiana. They are saying, wow, I have been able to get my daughter abortion care at
Yep.
whatever teenage age you want to go with, when I knew she wasn't ready to be a mother, or I wasn't ready to take on her, or like in this young lady's case, like does not have the financial support or backing at all. And this was a decision, that they may have made together, right? And it just frustrates me that we are using this opportunity to incriminate someone who is below the poverty line, doesn't have all the resources at their disposal, and trying to make an example out of her. And so, what I'm hoping is because they don't have that coercion piece in this indictment, that they can't do too much. But considering
Right.
Attorney General and Jeff Landry are very clear on what they're going after, um, I'm nervous, right? And we're
Yeah.
on the cusp of our legislative session in Louisiana right now. So we have not seen the abortion bills yet. We know they'll be there. And
Mhm.
last year they were able to get in that red herring of a bill, which was the criminalization of
Yeah.
misoprostol. Like we're just nervous about what might come next. Trying to get ready for it, but just really nervous. Yeah.
Right. It makes me glad to hear that, like, in Louisiana, like, people's reaction to this case is not, "Oh, what a terrible mother," right?
Yeah.
And it makes me think a lot about media coverage of this, because what I worry about most is that we're gonna see, like, local and national outlets, as they cover the story, pick up on this coercion thing as if Republicans are telling the truth about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Like, because there's this obsession with both sides coverage, both sides journalism, that they're gonna say, well, this happened. Oh, but also they say that this is coercion, without sort of that, like, contextualizing of, no one really thinks that. That's not real. They didn't bring the coercion charges. This is just about a PR strategy to try to make them look better, because they know that people hate these bans and they don't want to see families prosecuted for helping each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, one thing that stuck with me is I remember Right to Life, and the governor had kind of
Yeah.
released a statement around, but this teenage daughter really wanted to have this baby shower. She wanted to have this gender reveal, and I was just like, okay, that's what we're going for, right? Like we're encouraging young ladies to sign up for, and sure, if family decides that's what they want to invest in, because that's what children are.
Sure.
Sure, that's fine. But this family did not decide that. And so to insinuate, how dare, the mother take this away from her?
Right.
Could have had a baby shower. Are you kidding me? Like it was disgusting, and
No,
people put back on that
disgusting.
as well. Yeah.
No, it's disgusting. And the thing that, like, I find so hypocritical and so bizarre about this whole idea of, like, oh, like, coercion. You're literally advocating for parental consent and notification
Yeah.
laws for abortion rights. So
Yeah.
why is it okay to coerce your child into carrying a pregnancy to term? But, like, families can't make a decision together about abort. Like, it makes no sense. It's so hypocritical. It's infuriating.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
I have to ask you though, we have to talk about the AG, you and the AG.
Yeah.
Can you explain to people, like, what went down with this? Because I remember,
Yeah.
like, seeing some tweet and I was like, what is happening right
Oh
now?
God, it was a terrible day. I will be honest. It was a terrible day, and I hate to say that because I was at the DNC
Yeah.
and I was there all week, and folks were very supportive. I'd shared my story on stage alongside Hadley and Amanda, where I love them to death, and I remember like the next day, like all of us had like something that we were dealing with on our phones, and my something was the Attorney General back home in Louisiana while I was in Chicago had released a statement that basically the Louisiana laws do not provide for anyone to be denied care or, not get the access that they needed. Like physicians know what is expected of them. Physicians know that they are allowed to provide this care. And Caitlin's situation was a one-off, right? Like this is not
Right.
a problem, nothing to see here. And I just remember like literally boohoo crying for the whole
Oh
time
no.
that I was at the DNC. And I know Lauren was so tired of me texting her mad, and Cecile probably was too. But I was just so frustrated that she quickly, a woman, mind you, like a
Yeah.
woman that has kids, like literally went after another woman for basically sharing her truth. And that and I won't even say like, because I know some people had responded like two things can be true. No, no, they can't. Liz was wrong and is still wrong till this day, and has been very clear that even though physicians and me and honestly, we like in my personal capacity brought so many physicians to the Capitol last year. We had them sign letters like saying how these laws are vague and they don't provide enough
Yeah.
information. They don't provide cover. If anything, they can further criminalize them. And you know, in their profession, the profession that they literally went to school for training and licensing, and so it's been very clear in multiple ways, and it's been brought
Yeah.
to Murrell, our attorney general, in multiple ways in which the physicians don't feel like they have full discretion over, you know, or autonomy over their, you know, the healthcare that they want to give out. And so it was, I mean, until this day, like Liz constantly releases statements like that, like basically, like, again, nothing to see here. We have the most deplorable statistics when it comes to maternal health
Yeah.
care, Black maternal health care. And instead of her trying to, you know, put up provisions or laws or bills that move us to a better place of addressing that, it's still
Yeah.
like, nope, nothing to see here, buddy, and y'all can move on and things will continue as usual. And
Right.
so, yeah, yeah, all of it, right? It's
It's
just,
just
yeah,
gaslighting. I like that's the word. I
yeah,
know that that's such an overused word, but it's the word that just comes to mind constantly with this, where they're literally gaslighting people. It's like, nope, nothing is happening. The laws are fine. Like the doctor was just confused, or like what? Like it's mind-boggling. And like I do hope and I do think that people largely don't believe that. Like
yeah,
they're saying it to this echo chamber, they're saying it to like themselves and to conservative media, but there's not, I hope that people don't really buy that.
yeah, yeah. I would like to think that they don't. And Liz, though she's been like, and I can say this out loud too. I'm currently on I'm a plaintiff on a lawsuit that talks about that particular bill that was passed on October 1st of last year that, you know, says mifepristone,
The
misoprostol.
controlled substance, yeah.
Yes, like made them control substances, and Liz was ahead of that too, like got behind it, excuse me. And she's been very like staunchly against like our stance on this
Yeah.
particular bill and how it's going to further create a gap for women of color, especially in our maternity care deserts. And so she just always seems to be on the wrong side of history, but I think that's her MO, and we know how she's coming. We just have to make sure that we're in a position to try and get ahead of some of this. And again,
Right.
hoping this session she doesn't bring even more than that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think in a minute we'll start to take some questions. So if folks want to ask Caitlin or I thing, you know, you can start putting them in there. But is there anything specific you're expecting in Louisiana, like abortion related bills that you're on a particular lookout for, or anything you're worried about?
No, you know, I have like dug myself into a rabbit hole around like, you know, what are the ways they can um make the October 1st law even worse, or the
Mhm.
I kind of feel like this timeline, like leading up to incriminating the mother just a couple months before session, and that really being a
Right.
drive for what they could potentially bring during session. I'm trying to pick apart what they could possibly implement further. I know you can't technically like regulate commerce, but I think we're getting very close to that.
Right.
So like
Right.
what I've been working with a few attorneys trying to figure out like what they could potentially, and they'll put it in at the last minute, to be honest, just in
Right.
case we're not ready, we're not prepared, but we will be. I will most certainly make sure
Yeah.
we have kind of put together as many potential scenarios in terms of bills for this session, but I know that they will bring something behind that indictment. There has to be something. Yeah.
Right. Someone wants to know, how can we support the mother? I imagine they mean the mother who's been arrested and charged. Is there anything you know about like what's the best way we can
Yeah.
for some support?
That's really good. If it's okay with you, Jessica, I'll circle back on that when I don't know and
Of
I've asked
course.
myself like the ways in which we can support. So I'll circle back on that one.
Of course. I think that, I mean, it's so, that's always the question. Like when, I posted the story yesterday about the woman in South Carolina who is being forced to carry around a dead fetus. People want to know, how can they help?
Mm,
When I wrote about the young woman in Georgia who was arrested for her miscarriage, people want to know how they can help. And it's, I think what's so hard is that we don't have like this
Oh,
simple answer of like, how do you get in touch with someone, how do you get in touch with their lawyer, how
yeah,
do you, right, like how do you donate to their legal fund
exactly.
and know that that's the correct place to put it. And there's so many people like yourself who are working so hard behind the scenes. I don't think people realize, like, when you see it, when you see a story like that, when you see the story about the woman in South Carolina or Georgia, there are dozens of people behind the scenes who are like making phone
Yeah,
calls, and I know you do this, just like doing everything that they can to
yeah,
get that person care. But I think it's so hard for people who are reading or
yeah.
watching this happen and feeling like, what am I supposed to, what am I supposed to do,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
I think that's so good, and I will say this, y'all, like, even, like, through all the hell that, people are going through when trying to navigate healthcare, when they if they get it or maybe they don't, but for the times that they do get the care, there's a thousands of dollar bill waiting for them, right? And so, I think maybe, the homework, and that'll be a little bit of homework for myself, is, like, how can we get some resources to them? I know that
Yeah,
me and the other storytellers kinda interface with all the time, talk about that all the time, just how you're left with this really large bill that you can't even afford to pay. You're still paying years later. And so maybe that's another way we can support people. But
yeah.
I will definitely try and get some answers on that and I'll contact her attorney.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah.
Charlotte wants to know, how do we do a better job of controlling the narrative? I'm happy to say something first. I think about this
Right.
all the time. I think one of the big problems that we have is that we're constantly reacting,
Yeah.
right? Like we're not like being proactive, we're not pushing out a proactive vision. And part of that I understand, because we're on the defensive for good reason, because we're being attacked and we're trying to help people, right?
Yeah.
But I do worry about Democrats just responding to Republican lies and just being so busy responding to Republican lies that they're not pushing out something bigger, or they're not ignoring. Like, I don't want to hear Democrats like responding to like post-birth abortion. I want to hear, like,
Yeah.
I want them to be doing something bigger, and some, and I don't want to hear about Restore Row anymore. Like please, like give us something a little bit more. So when I think about controlling the narrative, to me, it's like, what is actually the story we want to tell, and what are the policies that we want, and how can we push for those separate from what conservatives are saying? Like, how can we make sure like we're not letting them frame the terms of
Yeah.
the debate? But
Yeah.
I would love to hear what you think.
No, that's so good. And I think it's a little the narrative's a little bit more in our control than we think, right? We think like it's this very like fetched thing on the other end of the spectrum that we just cannot control, and that's not true. I would say first, like if you and obviously if you're watching this, like you probably are super progressive, but if you need more information or you need to kind of get some talking points, excuse me, on how to like push back on that narrative, start with your own family members, right? That's something I
Yeah.
learned last year. I had people in my corner, people in my world that I talk to and engage with all the time who were spreading lies, for lack of a better phrase. Like, and it's so frustrating. And I always give my father-in-law a hard time, but I will give him credit that he has come a long way since he met me. And I think that is what it takes. Like our families that don't necessarily identify as the way that we do, whether it's politics or
Yeah.
just anything, right? Like the way in which we think about information. And I always mention this too, like the way in which people conceptualize info post COVID is just so different. And like we're still figuring out the
Yeah.
to cut through that noise and that disinformation and that misinformation. And I really do feel the only way to do it is in person, right? Like sitting at
Mm,
the Thanksgiving dinner table, talking over the holidays, at the barbecue, whatever. Have those hard conversations while you have people in front of you with folks that
yeah.
trust you and have a relationship with, because I promise you, they are going out and about, and whatever the information they do have or they have consumed, they are spreading that. And
Yeah.
to make sure it's the right thing, you know?
No, I love that. I think that's so incredibly important. I think sometimes people overlook the power of like that person to
Yeah.
person, right, interaction of changing hearts and minds. Like, I there's something I say a lot about, like, at the newsletter, we're not preaching to the choir, we're arming the choir,
Yeah.
because
Love
I know like no one, I have no illusions that some like conservative dad is going to read something I write and be like, "Oh, okay, now that you put it that way, like I'm cool." But like maybe their daughter or granddaughter will read something and feel like they're informed and like confident, and then can go have that conversation. And I think that's how we make that change. But
yeah.
it's tricky. It's so
It's
hard.
so tricky, it's so hard, but I will make you smile. The day after
Mhm.
the election, I actually had a guy from high school, DM me, and it was not nice. He was just straight up, yeah, he was like, went in on my ass, and he was just like, "Caitlin, I see that you repost this abortion every day stuff all the time." And I was like, "Have you ever actually read it?" And he was like, "No, because I'm not advocating for abortions every day." I was like, "I know that old girl has y'all thinking that we wake up every morning and that and we get our coffee and get in our Tesla, but that's not the case. I need you to actually read it." And he read a couple of your
Yeah.
Substack, and he was like, "Oh my God, like my wife is still getting, still wanting to expand our family, and we're pregnant right now." And he's like, "I didn't realize we can find ourselves in these situations, and this is really happening." And I realized in that moment, like he hadn't even though he had seen me share my story, he hadn't even heard it, right? Like it hadn't actually got through to him. And so all that to say, like
Wow.
again, like we think it's so out of our reach. No, like we can be reeling people in that are in our world or former high school friends, whatever.
Yeah.
And we'll probably be doing ourselves a better service than waiting
Yeah.
for the Democratic Party to get a better messaging system.
I love that. That makes me happy that he read
Yeah.
something and it like changed things. And
Yeah.
actually this question that we're getting right now sort of relates to that, right? Like I can't see the full question, but someone from University in South Texas, if I have colleagues who all think abortion is murder, how do I reach them?
Wow.
That's
Wow. Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, that is hard. That all think abortion is murder. Oh my god.
I'll like while you're thinking about it, I'll say I don't think that you need to convince everyone. I think that like we need to conserve our activist energy and like treat it like a precious resource. And yes, we want to go out and evangelize and change hearts and minds, but also I don't think it's worth talking to brick walls, right? I think that, and I think the other thing that we don't think about enough is, and it's easy to think this is not true because of the way this is framed in the media, but like we have public support. Abortion has public support and has for a long time. So we don't need to change so many hearts and minds. The issue is that it's like this small group of legislators controlling things and imposing their will on the vast majority of people who support abortion rights. And so sometimes I feel like the anti abortion movement wants us to spend all of this time and energy going out there and talking to brick walls rather than fighting voter suppression or fighting gerrymandering, right? To make sure that the people we already have on our side can actually make their voices heard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is so good. And I agree with you. I One thing my sister always reminds me of is I don't even think we're, to your point, trying to convince everybody, but less of, can we at least convince everybody that your belief should not be policy, right? Like I think that's
Right.
where we got to move from, because sure, I have a religious background. Like my parents raised me very Christian, so I'm from
Yeah.
the South, Southern Baptist, and I didn't need my parents to tell me, that what if they believed whether or not abortion was murder or abortion was X, Y,
Yeah.
whatever. Instead, they always have supported our decisions and given us the opportunity to get as much information about abortion care or reproductive health care as we need to feel like we're making an informed decision about our own lives. And I think if everybody started from there, we'd be in a better place. And maybe that's the goal, and less of, I don't need to know what you would do for yourself, right? I just need you to know
Right.
your belief should not restrict somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also wonder, like, and I'm sure that you all are thinking about this, like, we know that storytellers change minds and change votes, right? Like, and I have to imagine, unfortunately, that it's not going to be long before most people in this country know someone who's been impacted by an abortion ban, right? Whether because they've been denied care or because they're in New York and they can't get a pap smear for 3 months because OBGYNs are so overloaded, right? Um, but yeah, I'm just wondering like how you think about storytellers and how the organization thinks about storytellers as a political force.
Yeah. That's Uh, and it's when you said the 3 months, right? I
Yeah.
often think about the inundation of the other states, right, that are being able
Mhm.
to provide the care but still can't give the care. Um, I think for us, to your point around your equipping your army and
Yeah.
portion everyday space, I think we're thinking of it similarly with our storytellers, right? Like the ways in which they can, get not just get more comfortable sharing their story with a journalist or media, or using our work and our advocacy to further theirs, but also how are we supporting them so that they can go to a state legislature, or go to a policymaker, interface with them,
Yeah.
not necessarily with us or alongside us, but in their own right, and being confident enough to be able to do that. And I think that's a big piece of our work. Our idea is that if we're able to engage and equip, X amount of storytellers by X amount of time, we should be getting enough storytellers in front of these legislatures to speak truth to power,
Mhm.
to move some policy. And that's
Yeah.
one, of course. And what I'll say to that too is, like, a lot of times you'll hear from different state legislators across the country. They're like, I've never heard a story before. I've never had anyone in my district say that this was a problem. And it's like, okay, let's go. Like, we're gonna make sure that they are at your doorstep, for, no pun intended, but making sure that they are shouting to the rooftops that these are healthcare crises across the country, and these people are in your district. These people are here to tell you, and we want to make sure that they are, at the very least, until we can get in a better position, as you mentioned, with the gerrymandering and the voter suppression.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for some of those pieces to come into play, how are we making sure that people like myself, like others, like hundreds, thousands of people across this country, are being able to make sure that they're confident in sharing their story, and ultimately not just changing hearts and minds, but changing policy, which is so important, right?
No, it's key. Someone wants to know, do you have translation services to support storytellers who speak non-English language?
Thank you for asking that. We are working on it.
Like,
I'm not completely fluent, but I am, used to be. What do they say? If you don't use it, you lose it. So we've been using a bunch of our staff members that are bilingual, and as many resources as we can get our hands on for folks that don't necessarily speak English, and which is totally fine. And so we're going to continue making sure that we are meeting that basic need, and providing that service to as many storytellers that might do outreach to us, or vice versa.
love it. One of the things I notice, awesome that you're working on it this time. Um, I think it's really funny. I mean, I guess it's not funny, haha, but conservatives in the anti-abortion movement have obviously really taken notice at how powerful storytellers are and how important the work is that you're doing. And I can see them trying to replicate that with their own storytellers, which are generally like people who like 30 years ago had an abortion that they regret, right? Like they're not able to sort of like capture um people's attention or empathy in the same way because there are just not as many people who are with them, right?
No.
Or who want to come forward in that way. But I'm wondering, like, what kind of response have you seen from the anti-abortion movement? Or is there anything that like worries you about
Yeah.
their reaction and response to you?
Yeah, yeah. Oh God, like they don't sleep. I have seen,
Never.
geez, they don't sleep. I've seen so just many different, variations of reactions from different pro-life movements, and anti-abortion activists, and it for lack of a better term, like, it's cruel, right? Like, they will
Yeah.
literally drag the storyteller if it means that they are going
Yes.
against their agenda, right? Like, and so, to that I say, one, I shall hope they never become strong enough to actually build an army of storytellers. Nor do I think that
Yes.
folks would fall for that, honestly. And when I go to the state legislature in my own capacity, my own personal capacity, their stories are not met with, like, it falls on deaf ears. It's met with, like, okay,
Yeah.
sensitive can you be to folks that are actually dealing with real problems,
Yeah.
have trauma from these same bans and egregious laws that you guys have enacted years prior. And so, I've seen a lot of twisting of the story, if you will, Jessica,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
insinuating that, like, okay, even my own story, I'll take myself as an example because I don't
Yeah.
want to use anyone else, but um where they'll basically say, okay, this happened to Caitlyn, but this was malpractice. This happened to Nancy Davis, right? But this was just
Yeah.
a doctor who didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they will do that for every single storyteller. It doesn't matter if you put 100 or 500 in front of them, they're going to find something wrong with that particular practice or that facility or that hospital versus the actual law. They're always going
Yeah.
to move the goalpost. They're always going to make sure that they are keeping their folks in a place where they are believing that pro-life movement is including women and it is centering women and
Right.
centering our lives, and that's just not the case. And so
Yeah.
I and to that I say I think we've done a pretty good job of like helping people like understand and highlighting how if this was just a one-off, hundreds of people would not be, Googleable right now, right? You
Yeah.
could go on Google and find a bunch of people that have shared that same experience or worse experiences. And so I don't think people are falling for it. I hope they continue to understand and educate themselves, and like
Yeah.
they connect those dots, like see yourself in this, like if you have the potential. Hell, I mean, and I was going to say birthing people, but that's not true either. Like with the particular law, the October 1st law that was passed in Louisiana that we know
Mhm.
other legislatures will
Yeah.
try and pass this year, that talks about that controlled substance piece, that
Yeah.
goes into like basic health care. Like there are
Yeah.
women who have DM'd me, excuse me, and said, I went for a biopsy and I couldn't get this particular
Yes.
medicine. And I'm like, what do you mean? And like the pharmacist is Catholic and he
Yeah.
says that he's not going to fulfill it because, Louisiana has this new law and we can't get in. So they're going back and forth to hospitals. And to your point, how many people will we know that have either been harmed or
Yeah.
literally lost their life as a result of such a irresponsible law? And so I'm hoping people are waking up to it, pushing
Yeah.
back on it, and most importantly, we are not further strengthening the pro-life movement, but instead helping people,
Yeah.
understand they need to be on this side.
Yeah. I
um,
mean, I think it gets back to like the gaslighting, right?
yeah.
That we were
Oh yeah.
talking about earlier, where they're doing anything to pivot, to blame doctors, to
Yeah.
even like the thing that like really blew my mind and made me so upset after ProPublica published their stories about Candy Miller and Amber Nicole Thurman. um they've been blaming pro-choice people, right? Like their whole messaging tactic is to say pro-choice people, abortion rights activists scared doctors out of providing
Yeah.
care, and therefore that is why these women like have died. Where Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America spent $500,000 on a literal ad campaign using these women's names and
Wow.
photographs to
Wow.
say the left is killing women. I
Mm.
mean, the shamelessness, like the absolute shamelessness is just mind-blowing. Is
Right.
it's mind-blowing.
Right.
Someone asked, I want to make sure I didn't miss this. They want to know how they can support the organization.
Yeah, certainly. We have a website, abortionamerica.org. Also have social media. We're AIA Abortion America on Instagram. And I think nope, we don't have X anymore, I don't think. And I'm glad we don't. But so yeah, we have socials and website. And if you want to engage, you can simply go to info@abortionamerica.org. We are happy to engage in your state, support you, support a storyteller that you might know. You may be one yourself. And so however support looks like, we're happy to do that.
I love that. And then we have a question that says, if you don't mind sharing your experience as a Black woman, how much do you feel like respectability politics interacts with your work as an advocate and storyteller?
Oh wow, that's huge.
Big question. Yeah.
Huge. Yeah. I would have to say it impacts a great deal. Right.
Yeah.
I even like just with trying to share my story with different lawmakers in my state so that they can make informed, educated decisions about some of the bills that are put before them, especially since my own experience. I certainly think that plays a role. A lot of times I've gotten from lawmakers
Yeah.
direct to my face where they're like, are you sure you weren't just denied care because you were a Black woman? And I'm sure that's a part of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
but to insinuate or give cover to physicians just based on race or demographic, is something that I constantly come up against. Nancy, other storytellers, and it's weird because there's this. Honestly, something that we constantly unpack in the state of Louisiana is kind of the demographic around low income women, women of color, and how they are having a harder time getting physician's appointment or being able to receive abortion care in our state.
Mhm.
And all that to say, I'm kind of like doing a ton of research on this right now because I think like every state has like
Yeah.
their interesting um, lens in which the physician might make a decision, and like ours, I'm finding
Right.
that class does play a role, and that's a whole other story we could have for another day in terms of historical context in the
Yeah.
deep south. But all that to say, I know in terms of my being a woman of color, being a Black woman definitely plays a role in the way that I advocate and the way that I have to show up and the way that I share my story and preempt how a politician might respond to it. And then the piece around respectability politics, like one thing that I've learned from one of my interns is how it gets you nowhere, right? Especially especially in the deep south, like you can play the
Yeah.
game as much as you want to. Last year, and I can be honest with this because he's been honest with about this in interviews as well, the lawmaker that brought the bill, I remember going to him and like playing the game of like having several different meetings with this particular legislator and saying, you realize if you pass this law, like it's going to harm women of color, communities of color, women in
Right.
parishes that don't have maternity care. I remember him explicitly saying, "Well, in order to help my people, sometimes you got to hurt other people," and like that's just kind of the way that it lands, right? And like
Wow.
I kind of played into this idea that like if I played the game of respectability politics, wore the suit, got dressed, did my hair, looked presentable, had my baby on
Yeah.
my hip at the time my son was like 6 months when that bill was kind of moving through the legislature, like
Yeah.
really kind of show up in a quote unquote professional way. By that's those rules and regulations are definitely set by the establishment, but it does us no good. And so I've learned that that probably is not something that I should invest so much time in terms of like playing the game of respectability politics because
Right.
I don't find that it's gotten me any further than I've gotten in my own
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
That's a great question and a great answer. We have a question, and I think we'll do this question and maybe like one more. I know that you're busy. Someone wanted to know, how does disinformation regarding reproductive biology factor into abortion criminalization? And I think I can hit this first. I
Yeah.
think it's a huge right? Like when I'm covering these stories about like, the woman in Georgia who was arrested for her miscarriage, there is so much disinformation, and the people who are creating these laws and the people who are prosecuting these crimes know so little about pregnancy. They know so little about pregnancy loss, about abortion, about like any of it. I think it's a huge, huge deal when we look at Brittany Watts in Ohio, right? The woman who was charged with abuse of a corpse for fleshing her miscarriage. I think so much of this, in addition to like the misogyny and the racism, was just not understanding what a miscarriage was like, not
Yeah.
understanding how much blood there is, not understanding that like when you have a miscarriage, a little fetus doesn't like come out, and like there's this real ignorance that feeds into all of that criminalization.
Definitely, definitely. I think the biggest one I hear oftentimes is like a DNC is not an abortion. A DNC is not an abortion, and a woman like do you know how many people like read me for filth in the comments because they're like, "Oh, you were 11 weeks pregnant. You could pass that naturally. Who cares if it took you under 2 months? Like, you don't need abortion care for that." And so, but the right to life, the pro-life movement, like these organizations are designed to keep
Yeah.
up that narrative, right? To keep up
Yeah.
this inability for people to access real information around what reproductive health care really is, what abortion care really is. And so I think it plays a major role. And I constantly ask myself, like, what are the ways around this? Like, how do we navigate the disinformation around the biology piece? And
Mhm.
to that, I say, obviously, like most of our states that have these laws don't even have basic education in the school system, much less,
Yeah.
when you go to college, if you don't necessarily take a certain class, like, I mean, so it's just like, how do we fill in that gap? Folks are not getting it on social media. They are not getting it, on the web in general. And so it's a major issue. We definitely have to like look that in the face and figure out what are the ways to navigate it, and then ultimately do away with that much disinformation because it's harming too many people.
It really, I mean, it really is. And I think that you make a good point. Like the anti-abortion movement, like this is part of their thing, is to
Yeah.
divorce abortion from healthcare, to make people think abortion is one thing and healthcare is something else. And it's so incredibly dangerous. I know we're running up on an hour, and so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Why don't you tell people where they can find you
Yeah.
and learn more about the amazing work that you're doing?
Yeah, you're kind. Thank you so much again for having me. Like, this was such a fruitful conversation. I feel like I can finish my day now. But
Good.
yeah, so Kaitlyn Joshua, I am Kate.Joshua, Kait.Joshua on Instagram. I try to keep up with my page. Y'all don't kill me. I'm not the best at it. And I'm obviously just really invested in Abortion America and trying to. We're still kind of like in beginning phases of making it this amazing thing. And so, any advice or any storytellers out there that are want to be a part of this work and want to be a part of our movement, that we're continuing, not starting. To be clear, we're happy to have y'all in the fold. And you can find us at abortioninamerica.org.
Thank you so much. Thanks for making time for this. I know readers love the conversation and we got a lot of great questions. And I am sure that everyone is going to be going to the website and checking stuff out and getting in touch with you. And thank you for everything that you're doing. I know this work is so incredibly hard, and what you're doing, like interacting with people every day who have been through these traumas, is so, it's just incredible work. And I know that we're all really grateful.
Thank you. I'm grateful for y'all too. Thanks for having me.
Anytime, you'll have to come back soon.
Okay, deal.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Have a good afternoon.